Is that it? Okay, we're good. All right, if you have your Bible, go ahead and be opening to Isaiah chapter 6. Isaiah chapter 6 is where we'll begin this morning. Just as a precursor, I am on the floor this morning so that I can pace a little bit. And I have shared with you before that I struggle with anxiety, and today is one of those days where it's a little bit stronger on me. And so this allows me to kind of pace and work off some of that nervous energy a little bit. So I hope you'll bear with me as we talk through our subject today. What we're going to do is quite simple. We're going to look at three texts together. We're going to ask ourselves this question: have you seen Jesus? Now, obviously, when we talk about have you seen Jesus, none of us have ever seen him, obviously, in the flesh during his incarnation. And none of us have ever seen him in his glorified state, because human beings can't do that. The glory of it would be too much. But the idea is that through faith, have we seen him for who he is, and how does that affect us? Because what we're going to look at are three people who had an interaction with Jesus, and they saw him for who he was. They saw his divine state. They saw the miraculous that he could perform, and it forever changed them. And I think that a lot of times that's the key to conversion, is helping people to see Jesus. Because once you see who Jesus is, you say, I'll do whatever he says, and I'll do whatever it takes if that means that I can have him. Okay? So let's begin this morning by looking at Isaiah. We're going to follow the same basic model with each one of these because they all have the same basic structure or outline. And so to begin in Isaiah chapter 6, and we've been through this text before, but I want us to do it again here. First of all, let's see what it is that he sees. The first thing that he sees is that which is sacred. Okay, so John 12, 40 and 41, Jesus, this statement is quoted, a latter part of this chapter is quoted in reference to Jesus and the lack of belief in his miracles. And he says, the writer of John says, that these things Isaiah spoke when he saw his glory. Okay? And so what he's referencing is that the one that was seen in Isaiah chapter 6 was the second member of the Godhead. This is a pre-incarnate Jesus is what we call it. Okay? Or some people call it a Christophany or a Christophany, just an appearance of Jesus before he comes in physical form. So let's begin here as he sees him. He says, in the year that King Uzziah died, I saw the Lord sitting on a throne. So Uzziah was one of the most popular kings in Israel that they ever had. He was the longest reigning king for quite some time. He was eclipsed by one just a little bit later, but he reigned more than 50 years. And so in the year that King Uzziah died, now Uzziah started out and was a really good king for the majority of his reign, but a little bit later, he was lifted up with pride, and he tried to offer an offering in the temple when priests were resisting him, telling him not to do that. And because he continued to proceed, God smote him with leprosy. And he lived as a leper to the day that he died. And so the death of Uzziah would be a troublesome time in Israel. Okay? That is, a trusted, stalwart leader has now passed. And it's as if God is appearing to Isaiah saying, Uzziah was a good man, there's no question about it. But you need to see the king behind the king. You need to see the king who is on the literal throne in heaven, as opposed to a king who sits on a temporary throne in Israel. And so we see this image. I saw the Lord sitting on a throne. The word for Lord here is the one to whom obedience is due. It's a special name for God. So he's sitting upon a throne, and the throne is a symbol of authority. Okay? That's what a throne symbolizes. You can look at, and you know, what does this throne look like? I don't know, but when you look at 1 Kings chapter 10, and you read about Solomon's throne, and it says that there was never a throne built like it up until that very day. It was so elaborate and overlaid in gold and things along those lines. And so you have him here, and the Lord is seated on a throne, this symbol of authority. And then it says that he is high and lifted up, the exalted nature. So the throne itself doesn't even touch the earth, so to speak, as it appears. It sits above the earth, okay, maybe hovering in some way, but it's hovering above the earth. It's not coming in contact with the earth itself. But it's the idea of being lifted up and exalted. It's the idea behind God's transcendence and his difference, Okay? So, and then it says, the train of his robe filled the temple. Now, back in that day, royalty, they would wear their normal clothes, but they would also wear a long overcoat, so to speak. You've seen it even in kings today. A lot of formal paintings, if you look at British monarchies and things along those lines, they'll have special coats, and a lot of them will have long trains behind them. And the longer the train is the idea of royalty, okay? Now, this train of this robe is so big that it fills the temple. Now, we've already studied Solomon's temple in 1 Kings chapters 7, 8, and 9. And we know how big that temple was. And so the flow of, this is just the excess of his robe is filling up the temple. It's absolutely filling up the temple. And so there's this perfect beauty that's being put in front of Isaiah, and this holiness and this high picture. And it's not just Isaiah that sees it. This picture is also developed when we look at a certain order of angels that are identified here as the seraphim. Verse 2, above him stood the seraphim. Seraphim, a seraph is the singular version of that. A seraphim or seraphim is the plural version. In Hebrew, or when Hebrew is translated into English, and you have an im on the end or an am, that's plural, okay? And the singular version is seraph. So seraphim, so you have multiple seraphim. We don't know how many. A lot of other times when you see God's throne, it's surrounded. Sometimes 10,000 times 10,000 is the way it's described. The idea is innumerable. And so you have these seraphim, and the word literally means fiery ones. Fiery ones. And when you look throughout Scripture, there's this association between fire and angels. Not always, but there is a strong association. Psalm 104, Hebrews 1, places like that. And so here are these fiery ones, and as one writer suggested, it's their zeal for the Lord God. Their fire, it just exudes from them because they are zealous for the one who sits on the throne. So above him stood the seraphim. Each one had 6 wings. With 2 he covered his face, with 2 he covered his feet, and with 2 he flew. And so the idea, first of all, of covering the face, you remember when we were in 1 Kings 19 and God called Elijah out with a still small voice. You remember he was in the fire, he was in the earth, or he wasn't in the earthquake or the fire or the strong wind, but a small still voice called to him, and he wrapped his face in his mantle and he went out to meet with God. Okay, so the covering of the face, the idea of the reverence for who God is. And then you have the covering of the feet, which is very similar to Moses' burning bush experience, right? When he's told to take the shoes off your feet because the place whereon you're standing is holy ground. And so here are angels living in the presence of God continuously since the day of their creation. And God is, the one who sits on this throne is so holy and so sacred and so different. They don't even look at him. To cover their head and their feet is the idea of a symbolic covering. With 2, they keep afloat. So the one who is sitting on this throne is so vastly different. He's so vastly different. So above the throne stands a seraphim. Each one had 6 wings. With 2 he covered his face, with 2 he flew, and with 2 he fought. And with 2 he covered his feet, and with 2 he flew. And one cried out to the other, holy, holy, holy is the Lord of hosts. The whole earth is full of his glory. The idea of holiness, many people have rightly described when we're talking about holiness, depending upon whether the word holy is applied to a human being or whether it's applied to God, it can have different connotations. But one person I think is pretty close when he says that holiness is almost just a synonym for God. It's a separateness, not just a physical separateness, but a spiritual separateness, well, what's the word I'm looking for there? A moral separation. That's the word I'm looking for. Moral. That he is so perfect and so pure and so holy, and yet man is so different. And what you have here is antiphonal singing. So you've got one set of angels crying out to another set saying, holy, holy, holy is the Lord of hosts. The whole earth is full of his glory. And how long this goes on, we don't know. It seems to be a pretty common thing. You see it even in Revelation chapter 4 when we get another throne scene where we see God the Father on his throne. They're also doing the same thing. So, they're crying out. And as we talked about before, the three times, the use of the word holy three times is the way of being the superlative degree, as it would be called. Think about it this way. You've got good, better, and best, right? Your best, that's your superlative degree. You can't go any higher than that. You know, even when you're a kid, you might say, well, I'm the bestest. You know, you're fighting, well, I'm good, well, I'm better, well, I'm best, well, I'm the bestest. You know, but ultimately, we all know it stops at best. It's the superlative. And so to emphasize the point of holy, 3 times holiness, that's the superlative degree. This is the very essence of holiness. This is what holiness is. There is nothing else beside this. And then it says, and the foundation of the threshold shook at the voice of him who called. Just by his speaking, things began to shake. And the house was filled with smoke. Now, there are a couple ways to interpret that. The most likely, though, is that this is the smoke of God's indignation and wrath. Okay? His wrath is being poured out. So here he is. This is what Isaiah is going to see. He sees that which is sacred. He sees the very definition of sacredness. He sees Jesus. But this is something that will always happen, okay? Whenever a person sees Jesus for who he really is, when you look at this, when you look at this being, you know this being is far different than we are. Just reading it makes you kind of want to recoil and hunker down. Because he's so vastly different than us. But you know, that's always supposed to be the proper action. Now watch what Isaiah also sees and what every person sees when they truly see God for who he is. And Isaiah speaking in the first person, woe is me, for I am lost. He pronounces woe upon himself. That's the strongest word a prophet used to describe the destruction and the damnation that should come from God upon an individual for their sinfulness. He says, woe is me. Now think about this. Isaiah is in the temple. He's worshiping. We would consider him to be a pretty good guy, right? He seems to be a faithful man. But he catches one glimpse of God and he just recoils in himself. He says, I'm lost. I'm a man of unclean lips, and I dwell in the midst of a people of unclean lips. Now listen to him. For my eyes have seen the King, the Lord of hosts. I've seen him. And when you see God for who he is, what reciprocates that, what comes right behind that is you see yourself for who you are. You see yourself as a small, sinful creature. Now, when you combine, usually this is a deadly combination, right? So when you combine a holy God with sin in his presence, what does he usually do? What does his nature demand? It demands punishment. But this is what's so amazing about this account. Because what you would expect to happen does not happen. Not even close to happening. All right, watch it. Verse 6. It says, then one of the seraphim flew to me, having in his hand a burning coal that had been taken with tongs from the altar of incense. And he touched my mouth and said, behold, this has touched your lips, and your guilt is taken away, and your sin is atoned for. Instead of punishing Isaiah, which Isaiah has pronounced upon himself, he said, I deserve it. God forgives him. He forgives him. Who is a God like this? This is why in the Psalms you'll run into texts like, speaking to God, but with you there is forgiveness that you may be feared. How do you not love and honor a God who forgives when he has every right in the world to put you underneath the ground? And his first inclination is to forgive you. Not to punish you, but to forgive you. There's solace in that. But then what happens when the sin is atoned for? So in verse 8, there seems to be this conversation amongst the Godhead. It says, I heard the voice of the Lord saying, whom shall I send and who will go for us? Who are we going to send to the people to preach this message? Then I said, here I am, send me. And he said, go to this people and say, keep on hearing but do not understand. Keep on seeing but do not perceive. Make the heart of this people dull and their eyes heavy, and blind their eyes lest they see with their eyes and hear with their ears, understand with their hearts, and turn and be healed. Then I said, how long, O Lord? And he said, until the cities lie waste and without inhabitant, and houses without people, and the land is desolate waste, and the Lord removes people far away, and the forsaken places are many in the midst of the land. What happens then? Isaiah serves him. When you see God for who he is, you see yourself for your sinfulness. And when that forgiveness is extended to you, you spend the rest of your life serving that one that you've seen and that you have experienced their pardon. You spend the rest of your life. Isaiah was told to go and preach, and basically what he was told was that they're not going to listen to you. You're going to preach basically till you're blue in the face, and they're not going to listen to you. And then Isaiah said, how long am I supposed to do that? He said, until they're taken into captivity. But I want you to give them every chance in this world to be forgiven. How do you not love a Jesus like that? It doesn't make any sense from a human perspective. Let's go now to the scripture reading we had a minute ago in Luke chapter 5. Luke chapter 5, we're going to see the same thing here. Now that we've established the pattern, we'll probably move a little bit more quickly. So Luke chapter 5, here's Jesus at the beginning of his ministry. Obviously, he's calling disciples at this point. They're going to come and follow him in just a moment. But we see Jesus, and this is not what we would consider to be a glorified state, a miraculous state like Isaiah chapter 6 was. This is just, Jesus is in the flesh. They see him. They know who he is. But he performs a miracle, and that's what really moves Peter on this occasion. So Luke 5, beginning in verse 1. It says, on one occasion when the crowd was pressing in on him to hear the word of God, he was standing by the lake of Gennesaret, which is just the Sea of Galilee, okay? It says, and he saw two boats by the lake, but the fishermen had gone out of them, and they were washing their nets. They usually fished at night in this particular setting, and so they would be washing the sand and garbage out of their nets. And he says, getting into one of the boats, which was Simon's, he asked him to put out a little from the land, and he sat down and taught the people from the boat. So here's Jesus in one of his mass teachings. People are pressing in on him, and honestly, for multiple reasons, but one of which was safety. You get big crowds, and they start pushing. They're going to push him out of the water. Now, we know Jesus doesn't have a problem with water. I mean, it's not like he walked on it. So it's not like he can't figure out what's going on. But he does launch himself out so that he can calm the crowd a little bit and teach and project and be heard. So, verse 4, he finishes. When he had finished speaking, he said to Simon, put out into the deep and let down your nets for a catch. And Simon answered, Master, we toiled all night and took nothing. The word used here for toiled all night is a word that means to work to the point of exhaustion. What they basically are saying to him is, we've been killing ourselves all night and we didn't catch a fish. And now you're telling us to go out in a time when fish aren't normally caught, and now we're going to catch? But you have to give it to Peter here. I love this statement that he makes. And I think it's the old King James that reads this way. Nevertheless, at your word, we will let down the net. What you're asking us to do doesn't make any sense. We've been doing this all night, caught nothing. Same lake, what's changed? We're not fishing at the prime time of day to catch fish. Doesn't make any sense. But at your word, I'm going to let down the net. Verse 6, and when they had done that, they enclosed a large number of fish, and their nets were breaking. And they signaled their partners to come in the other boat to come and help them. And they came and filled both boats so that they began to sink. So both boats have been so loaded with what they've caught, the weight of them is driving them down. Now, remember, just hours before, they couldn't catch anything. Jesus says, throw your net over the side, and he's sinking two boats. Two of their, what they would consider to be commercial fishing boats, not necessarily the size of we would think of a commercial boat, but still significant. And so, in verse 8, you see Peter's reaction. Actually, skip over that for a second and just go to verse 9. It says, "For he and all who were with him were astonished at the catch of the fish which they had taken. And there were also James and John, the sons of Zebedee, who were the partners with Simon. And Jesus said to Simon, 'Do not be afraid. From now on you will be catching men.' And when they had brought their boats to the land, they left everything and they followed him." So, the first thing that he sees is the sacredness of Jesus. How in the world did this just happen? Here's Jesus. He comes upon the scene. We haven't caught anything, and now we're literally swimming in fish. Now, what was Peter's reaction when all this happened? It's the same thing Isaiah's was. Verse 8, it says, "But when Simon Peter saw it, he fell down at Jesus' knees, saying, 'Depart from me, for I am a sinful man, O Lord.'" He realized that the one with whom he was dealing was so vastly different than him, that nobody can do this except God. And God is holy, and Simon knows that he is not. The only thing he can do is say, "Send away, because I can't abide in your presence." He sees Jesus for who he really is. People look at his reaction and say, "Why is he sending Jesus away? Why is he saying, 'Depart from me?'" Because he sees himself for who he is. It's the same reason we all try and hide from God. Because we know that he is holy and we know that we are anything but it. He saw himself for who he was. But what does Jesus do in response to him? Jesus said to Simon, "Don't be afraid. I'm not here to harm you." That's what he's saying. I'm not here to harm you. I'm not here to crush you in your sinfulness. I'm actually here to employ you in my service. Because from now on, you're going to catch men. I'm going to teach you to be an evangelist. I'm going to teach you how to save people. And they all forsook their fishing enterprises and followed him. Followed him literally to their deaths. Every one of them. Why? They saw Jesus. They saw him for who he was. They saw themselves for who they were. They saw what he had done for them. And trying to tell them to stop serving Jesus was like trying to tell them to stop breathing. What do you mean, stop serving Jesus? Why in the world would I do that? Well, we're going to kill you if you do. I can't change the fact that Jesus is who he is. And I can't change the fact of what Jesus has done for me. And I'm certainly not going to change the fact that I serve him. It's not going to happen. Because when we see Jesus for who he is, it changes us. Okay? One final one, and there are several others you could look at. You could look at, for an example, Matthew 17 at the Mount of Transfiguration and some other places. But we're going to finish with Revelation chapter 1. Revelation chapter 1, where John is an older man now on the Isle of Patmos. He's been exiled there for his faith. And this is the beginning of the revelation. Jesus is going to appear to him in a glorified state, in a different form. Of course, he knew him and was the Lord's closest friend on earth during his incarnation. But this is going to be a different appearance. So he says, "I, John, your brother and partner in the tribulation and the kingdom and patient endurance that are in Jesus, was on the island called Patmos, on account of the word of God and the testimony of Jesus." Some reports claim it seems as if he was working in copper mines on Patmos. Some reports claim, now he's much older also. He's in his 90s now, late 80s, early 90s, which, even in modern day generation, that's a good age to live to. In that day, it was basically unheard of. I mean, your average life expectancy was maybe 50. But there's also, I think it was Tertullian, who said that they actually dropped an aged John into boiling tar to try and kill him that way. And when that didn't work, they sent him to work 12-hour days on Patmos in the copper mines. And so here he is, and he's writing. Verse 10, he says, I was in the Spirit on the Lord's day, talking about inspiration, the Lord's day, of course, being Sunday. And I heard behind me a loud voice like a trumpet. Now, we're dealing with apocalyptic literature, so it's images. So you have to take the image and see what's being said. So like a trumpet was used, you look at Numbers chapter 10, you see a number of different uses for the trumpet in the Old Testament. The trumpet was used to get attention, basically. So I heard a voice like a trumpet. What he's saying is I heard a voice that was very distinct, and it grabbed my attention. It was very authoritative. He says, write what you see in a book and send it to the 7 churches, to Ephesus, to Smyrna, to Pergamum, and to Thyatira, and to Sardis, and to Philadelphia, and to Laodicea. That was the common postal route of main cities and stops. He says then in verse 12, then I turned to see the voice that was speaking to me, and on turning I saw 7 golden lampstands. Okay? So kind of visualize, so at certain weddings you'll see a lot, well, most of those are multiple ones, but imagine just a single stand, okay? Nothing elaborate, just a single tall stand, and then with a candle, a very simple, slender candle on top of it, and it's lit, okay? There are 7 of those in a circle. And Jesus, the one he's seeing, is walking around in the midst of them. Now, what he's indicating, those 7 candlesticks are the 7 churches. And here is Jesus walking around in the midst of them. It's a picture of Jesus' fellowship with the church and his inspection of the church. He keeps a constant eye on it. And so he sees him there in the midst of those lampstands, verse 12, one like a son of man. That is, he had a human appearance. And he's clothed with a long robe with a golden sash around his chest. Now in Exodus chapter 28 and verse 39, the high priest wore this long robe with a golden sash. And so Jesus is wearing priestly garments, and already in the book in chapter 1 and verses 5 and 6, he's talked about how Jesus has made us priests on the earth, and so Jesus is serving in the role of priesthood. So it says, verse 14, the hairs of his head were white like white wool, like snow. Now white has a couple different connotations. So white could be holiness, the cleanliness of something. It could be age and wisdom. It's used that way as well. You see it in Daniel 7, some other places. And so what he's seeing is, he's basically describing the characteristics of Jesus. There's this holy one that's infinitely wise, who is walking in the midst of the golden candlesticks. And his eyes were like a flame of fire. The idea of being able to penetrate anything. The image is of his omniscience. He sees everything and he knows everything. He sees everything and he knows everything. And then his feet were like burnished bronze refined in a fire. That is, burnished bronze refined. You can use those feet to crush out. There's strength in that bronze, and you can crush anything beneath you. So it's a symbol of his omnipotence. His power is beyond comprehension. And then it says his voice was like the roar of many waters. It was very loud, and water, of course, can be extremely loud. Any of you who have visited certain locations have experienced that. The sound of it flowing over a waterfall or something, like Niagara Falls or something along those lines, can be deafening. And so his voice is very authoritative and loud as it speaks. In his right hand, he held 7 stars. And the 7 stars, he will say in verse 20, are the 7 angels to the churches that will carry the messages that will carry the revelation to these churches. And from his mouth comes a sharp 2-edged sword to do battle, the word of God being strong and powerful. And his face was like the sun shining in its full strength, and so he's completely radiant. So taking all those in, I know that's rapid fire. What you have basically is an overwhelming sacred image of Jesus. And what is John's reaction? The Lord's best friend upon the earth during his incarnation, what is John's reaction? When I saw him, I fell at his feet as though dead. His holiness, his majesty, everything that he is, he radiates. And John was paralyzed in front of it. It's not uncommon. You see it in Daniel chapter 10. You see it in Ezekiel chapter 1 and verse 28. Both after having interactions with God, fall on their face. Daniel actually falls asleep twice. It's just too much for him. It just puts him to sleep. And so here he is. John recognizes a longtime servant and an apostle of Jesus. He looks at him and he recognizes, yes, he was my best friend on earth, and yes, he's my Lord, but there's something still different about him. The way he's to be treated, the way people honor him is different. So then what does he do? Jesus says to him, but he laid his right hand on me and said, fear not. Don't you find it amazing that in all three of these occasions where the majesty and the glory of Jesus literally paralyzes these three men, every time God forgives, or he says, don't be afraid, or he touches. I'm not intending to do harm to you. And again, that is so vastly different than what you would expect from a holy God interacting with sinful people. And so he sends John to continue his service, basically. He says in verse 19, write therefore the things that you have seen, and those things that are, and those things that take place after this. That's the basic outline of Revelation. Tell people what you've seen right here in my appearance to you. Tell them the things that are. That's chapters 2 and 3, the 7 churches and the changes that need to be made there. And then the things that will be after this. That's the rest of the Revelation from chapter 4 to the end. But he's employing him in service, right? And John is glad to participate in the revelation and to serve God. And so from all of these, we're seeing a common thread. That God is just so vastly different than us. And I've said it a million times, and I'm going to say it again. If there were one thing, if God gave me a chance, that God gave me the same chance he did Solomon, and said, ask one thing and I will give it to you, I would ask him to imprint his holiness on my mind. So that I would never forget that although God, he's loving, he's forgiving, but he's different. And he's not to be taken lightly. As a matter of fact, someone that holy and that forgiving, the only thing that makes sense is spending the rest of your life loving and adoring and serving. It's the only thing that makes sense. And so the question for us is, again, as we began, have you seen Jesus? There are many people, I believe, that serve him even today that have still never really seen him. They've never really come to understand. And I will be the first to tell you, all of us, one of the best lectures I ever sat through, the man started his lecture this way. He said, everyone in this room, myself included, he said, I feel safe in saying this, our idea of God is too small. Our idea of God is too small. He is bigger. He is more powerful. He is more holy than we could ever imagine. But once you catch a glimpse, and then you spend the rest of your life watching that glimpse grow bigger and bigger and bigger, it's like a light that gets brighter and brighter and brighter. You're drawn to him. So this morning, if a person desires to come to Jesus, yes, as we've said, he's holy, but he's so incredibly gracious and forgiving. He's He's so incredibly gracious and forgiving. And He desires to forgive you. Notice that. He desires to forgive you. Not just that He's willing, but that He wants to. If you've never come to know Him with a penitent faith, confessing Him to be the Son of God, to be immersed in water for the forgiveness of your sins, to be baptized, He welcomes you in. He forgives you, makes you His own. Or maybe as a New Testament Christian, we haven't been faithful to Jesus. We haven't loved Jesus the way that we should. We can also pray together about that. Or maybe we're just struggling with things in general, and we need to talk about and pray about those things together. If we can help you this morning, we want to, as we stand and sing this song.